Roman Vescri didn't knock. That was the first thing people learned about him. He never knocked, never waited, never asked. He simply arrived, and the room rearranged itself around his presence. So when the door of wild ivy flowers swung open at 7:43 in the morning, 15 minutes before Seraphine Vale had even turned the sign to open, nobody in Astoria thought anything of it. Nobody in Astoria knew what Roman Vescari was. He stood in the entrance for a long moment, taking in the buckets of dahlias along the left wall, the dried lavender hanging in bundles from the ceiling beam, the 6-year-old girl sitting cross-legged on the wooden counter with a fistful of sunflower stems and her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Then his eyes moved to Seraphine. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach anything above the jaw. 7 years, he said. I have to say, flowers suit you. The scissors in Seraphine's hand went still. Leora looked up from the sunflowers. We're not open yet. I know, Roman said, not looking at the child. I'm not here to buy flowers. If you've ever had a moment where your entire body understood something before your mind caught up, where the air changed temperature and your lungs forgot their rhythm before a single word was spoken, then you already know what happened inside Seraphine Vale in that instant. Her hands did not shake. She had trained them not to, but the scissors lowered to the counter with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Leora, she said. Quiet. Steady. Go water the roses in the back room. I already watered them. Water them again. The girl read something in her mother's voice that she couldn't have named at 6 years old, but would remember clearly at 30. She slid off the counter without arguing, clutching 3 sunflower stems to her chest like a bouquet for someone she hadn't met yet, and disappeared through the back curtain. Roman watched her go. She has his eyes, he said. That's unfortunate. For you. Seraphine's fingers found the edge of the counter. How did you find me? You made a credit card error 3 years ago. A single transaction in your real name. Probably a mistake, probably late at night, probably exhausted. He tilted his head. Everyone makes one mistake. What do you want? The same thing I've always wanted. He reached into his jacket. Not for a weapon, she noted. Too theatrical, too final for Roman. And produced a small photograph. He set it on the counter between them without walking closer. The distance was deliberate. Everything Roman did was deliberate. I want you to come home, and I want you to bring the evidence your brother hid before we relocated him. She didn't look at the photograph. She already knew what it would show. It would show Cassian. It always came back to Cassian. My brother is dead, she said. Your brother is in a facility outside of Portland that I pay $40,000 a month to maintain. He said it the way someone mentions a utility bill. He's been there for 6 years. He's in reasonable health, all things considered. He reads, apparently. History books. Roman paused. He doesn't know you're alive. I thought it was kinder. The counter edge cut into Seraphine's palm. You have 48 hours, Roman said. After that, I stopped being kind. He left without touching anything. The bell above the door rang once, small and ridiculous, the way it did when any customer entered or exited. And then the shop was silent except for the sound of water running in the back room and a 6-year-old humming something tuneless to herself among the roses. If you're watching this from wherever you are in the world, if this story already has its hand around your throat, hit that like button right now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. Subscribe if you haven't, because what comes next is the part nobody sees coming, and you don't want to be the person who missed it. Wotem. 7 years earlier, Seraphine Vale did not exist. Her name then was Sarah Maddox, and she worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company in Seattle that was, on paper, one of the most respected freight operations on the West Coast. Off paper, it moved other things, the kind of things that required 3 sets of books and a very particular understanding between the people who loaded the containers and the people who inspected them. She hadn't known at first. That was the truth she had repeated to herself so many times across so many years that she sometimes forgot it was actually true, and not just a story she'd invented for comfort, but it was true. She'd taken the job for the salary and the benefits, and because she was 24 and her brother Darian was 18 months out of a stint in county and needed a stable address to put on his parole paperwork, the job paid well. She asked no questions. That was not the same thing as knowing. What she knew now, what 7 years of careful, furious, methodical study had taught her, was everything. She knew the structure of the Draven Syndicate from the bottom to the ceiling. She knew which port officials were on payroll and which were genuinely ignorant. She knew the names of the 3 shell companies Roman Vescari had established in her and Cassian's names without either of their knowledge, the financial infrastructure he'd built so quietly and so patiently that even the people running it didn't know who it ultimately served. She knew the date of the meeting where Roman had presented forged evidence to Cassian suggesting that Sarah had arranged the assassination of his father's oldest friend. She knew the date of the counter meeting, 3 days later, where someone had shown her a photograph and a financial transfer that appeared to prove Cassian had ordered a hit on Darien. She knew neither of those things had happened. She had known that within 2 weeks of disappearing. The problem was that knowing a thing and being able to prove it were entirely different categories of problem, and she had spent 6 years building toward proof while keeping herself and her daughter alive in a coastal town where nobody asked too many questions, and the most dangerous thing on any given Tuesday was the fog. She had also spent 6 years not thinking about Cassian Draven. She was not always successful. The morning after Roman's visit, she opened the shop at the usual time because closing it would signal something wrong to people who might be watching, and people were certainly watching. She arranged the Dahlia display in the window. She made Leora's lunch. She called the elementary school and said there might be a family emergency and to expect Leora to be absent starting tomorrow, keeping her voice pleasant and slightly distracted the way mothers sounded when they were managing too many things at once. Then she went into the back office, closed the door, pulled the third-floor tile from the left in the corner of the room, and looked at what she kept there. A phone, prepaid, charged monthly, and never once used. A set of documents in 3 different names. $4,200 in cash and small bills. A photograph of Darien that was 7 years old and showed him at 21, grinning outside a diner, squinting against the sun. A small black notebook with 7 years of documented evidence in handwriting so compressed it looked like a different language. And underneath all of that, wrapped in a cloth that had been her grandmother's and smelled faintly of cedar, a bracelet she had never once put back on her wrist. She did not take the bracelet out. She took the phone, the notebook, and $1,800. She repacked everything else. She replaced the tile. Then she sat on the floor of the back office with her back against the wall and thought, with the precision and detachment she had taught herself, about what Roman's visit actually meant. He hadn't come with men. That was the first thing. Roman Viscari, who could have sent 6 people with guns and been done with this in 20 minutes, had come alone, presented a threat, and left. Which meant either he genuinely wanted the evidence above all else and believed the threat would be sufficient to obtain it, or he was running a surveillance operation and the visit was designed to make her move, and moving would reveal something he needed to see, or both. With Roman, it was frequently both. The second thing was Darien. If Roman was telling the truth about her brother being alive, and Roman lied in layers, which meant the base layer was frequently accurate, then there was a facility outside Portland and a man inside it who had been living without knowing his sister was alive for 6 years. The photograph Roman had left on the counter showed what appeared to be a current image of Darien, heavier than she remembered, reading at a table. The lighting was institutional. His hair had threads of gray. She had wept once in the back office, alone, and allowed herself 90 seconds of it. Then she stopped. The third thing was the timeline. 48 hours. Roman had said 48 hours, which meant he was operating under external pressure, which meant something had changed in the structure above him, and the most likely explanation for that was the front doorbell rang. She was on her feet before the second ring finished. She moved through the curtain into the shop with a clipping shears in her right hand held low along her thigh, angled for use rather than display, and she stopped. The man standing inside the door was not Roman Vescari. He was taller than she remembered, though she would have said that was impossible because she had remembered every physical detail of him with the particular cruelty of a memory that would rather hurt you than let you forget. His hair was darker, shorter. There was a scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a gray jacket over a dark shirt, and he looked completely, utterly wrong standing among her flowers. Too large, too still, the kind of stillness that wasn't calm but was control. the way a fault line is still right up until it isn't. Cassian Draven was looking at a bucket of white ranunculus with an expression she couldn't immediately read, and then he looked up and saw her, and the expression became something she had no name for. Neither of them spoke for 4 full seconds. "I heard this was the best flower shop in Astoria," he said. "It's the only flower shop in Astoria." "That tracks." He hadn't moved from the door. She hadn't moved from the curtain. The shears were still in her hand, and he had very clearly registered them and had not reacted, which told her that he'd come alone and that he was trying extremely hard to not make this into a thing it couldn't recover from. "How long?" she said. "Since yesterday." A pause. "The juice box was in the recycling bin outside. I needed a lab to confirm." The shears lowered an inch. Not deliberately. Her hand simply did it. "Leora is not," she started. "I know how old she is." His voice was flat, not angry. Something that had gone past anger into a place that was quieter and more difficult to address. "I can do arithmetic." "Cassian, I'm not here about that." He said it like a door being closed. "I'm here because Roman Vescari was in this town yesterday morning, which means I was 40 minutes behind him, which means whatever he told you, whatever he asked for, whatever deadline he put on it, you need to tell me now." She stared at him. "You've been tracking Roman," she said, "for 8 months. Why?" The word came out with more weight than she intended. He heard it. He looked at her for a long moment. At the shop, at the flowers, at the back curtain through which a 6-year-old was presumably still tending roses. And some piece of his careful composure shifted, not enough to break, but enough to show the fault underneath. "Because 6 months ago I found a record that shouldn't have existed," he said. "A transfer from an account I didn't open, in a name I don't use, for a contract I never issued." He paused. "It was dated 4 days before Marcus Hale died. Marcus was my father's oldest friend. He was also the closest thing I ever had to an uncle." She knew this. She had known this for years, but knowing it intellectually, from the outside, in the language of documentation and evidence, was an entirely different thing from hearing Cassian say Marcus Hale's name in a flower shop in Oregon. "The account was traced," he continued. "It took 8 months and 3 people who no longer work for me because they asked too many questions. It traced back to Roman. Not to a cutout, not to a shell, to Roman directly." His jaw shifted. "Which means everything I thought happened 7 years ago didn't happen," she said. "None of it. The silence between them was the kind that had history in it." "I need to know what Roman asked you for," Cassian said. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the tile in the corner of the back office and what was under it. She thought about 48 hours and a man in a facility outside Portland reading history books. "He wants a notebook," she said finally. "Evidence. Financial records, transaction logs, a signed confession your father recorded before he died that implicates Roman in 3 contract killings, including the one he blamed on me." She paused. "My brother has been alive for 6 years in a private facility Roman controls. Roman used him to keep me from surfacing the evidence." Cassian's face went very still. "Where is the notebook?" he said. "Under the floor of my back office. And your brother?" "Somewhere outside Portland. I don't have an address. Roman gave me 48 hours. Cassian looked at the floor. Then he looked at the back curtain. Then he looked back at her, and something in his face made her feel like she was standing at the edge of a very significant height. "Does she know about any of this?" he said. "No." "What does she know about her father?" Seraphine felt the question land somewhere in the center of her chest. She knows she has one. She knows he doesn't know about her yet. A beat. "I told her we'd figure it out someday." He absorbed this without expression. "We have 46 hours, he said. "And I have 3 people outside who have been tracking Roman's movements for 2 weeks. And we need to move before he realizes I'm here, because the moment he does..." The front window exploded inward. Seraphine was already moving before the glass hit the floor. Not toward the door, not toward the window, but toward the back curtain and through it, reaching the back room in 3 strides, pulling Leora off the stool she'd climbed to reach the higher rose shelf, tucking the girl against her chest, and dropping behind the large steel work table as the second shot punched through the exterior wall and took out a shelf of ceramic pots above them. Leora had not screamed. She had gone rigid and then gone very quiet in that particular way children do when they understand instinctively that sound is the wrong choice, and Seraphine held her against her chest with one arm and with the other hand pulled the floorboard from its edge beneath the work table, the one she'd loosened 3 years ago against exactly this kind of afternoon. The exit tunnel was a crawl space that opened into the building next door's basement, then up through a utility hatch and out into the alley. It was low and dark and smelled like old concrete. She had practiced it twice a year every year since installing it. She could do it blindfolded. From the front of the shop came the sounds of someone moving through broken glass, and then a crash, and then, unexpected, the sound of something else entirely. Fists. A body hitting the wall. The particular acoustic signature of a fight that had already gone past negotiation. Cassian was still in the front of the shop. She stopped at the mouth of the tunnel with Leora in her arms. She should not go back. She went back. She came through the curtain low, and what she saw was 2 men she didn't recognize and Cassian in the center of them, bleeding from a cut above the scarred eyebrow, with the particular economy of motion she recognized as the kind of training that didn't come from any gym. One of the men had a weapon, and Cassian had his wrist, and was in the process of relocating the wrist to an angle it wasn't designed for. The second man reached inside his jacket. Seraphine threw the clipping shears. Handle first. She hadn't been trying to kill him, just redirect his attention. And it hit him across the jaw hard enough to snap his head sideways and buy the 2 seconds Cassian needed to bring the first man down completely and turn and hit the second man once, cleanly, in a way that ended the problem. Silence. The floor was glass and ceramic and spilled water from 3 overturned buckets. Cassian turned and looked at her. Leora, peering over Seraphine's shoulder from the crook of her arm, looked at Cassian. Cassian looked at Leora. The silver blue eyes, his eyes, unmistakably, in a 6-year-old face framed by dark hair, blinked at him with perfect seriousness. "You're bleeding," Leora told him. "I know," he said. "Mama has bandages in the back." "Leora," Seraphine said. "She's right," Cassian said quietly. He didn't look away from the child. "We're going to need the back. We're going to need the notebook. And we're going to need to move in the next 10 minutes before Roman's people outside realize these 2 aren't checking in." Seraphine looked at her daughter, at the man who was her daughter's father, at the ruined front of the shop she'd spent 3 years building into something that felt like it might last. "Okay," she said. It came out rougher than she intended. "Okay." She set Leora down, and the girl immediately went to retrieve the fallen sunflowers from the floor, because she was 6, and sunflowers were important, and Seraphine watched her for exactly 1 second. 1 second that cost her nothing and contained everything, before she turned and went to pull the notebook from under the tile. They moved in 9 minutes flat. Cassian made 2 calls while Seraphine packed. Not the kind of packing that takes time, but the kind she had rehearsed until her hands did it faster than her mind could track. Leora's go bag had lived under her bed since the girl was 2, updated every 6 months. Clothes, snacks, the worn stuffed rabbit named Percy that had lost both button eyes and gained a hand-stitched replacement that Seraphine had done at midnight after a nightmare. While Leora retrieved Percy with the gravity of someone completing a critical mission, Seraphine pulled the floorboard notebook, the prepaid phone, the cash, and the documents. She did not take the bracelet. She almost did. Her hand rested on the cedar cloth for 3 full seconds. Then she replaced the tile and stood up. Cassian was at the back door when she came through. He'd torn a strip from a dish towel and pressed it above his eyebrow, which had stopped bleeding but would need closing properly sometime in the next few hours. He'd dragged the 2 unconscious men into the storage room and propped the broken front door back into its frame. It wouldn't fool anyone up close. It might fool a street-level camera for another 15 minutes. "Car's 2 blocks north," he said. "Gray SUV, my people. We move on foot, normal pace, Leora in the middle." "She doesn't know who you are," Seraphine said quietly. "I know." "Don't? I'm not going to do anything." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, something pressurized. "I understand the situation. Let's go." They went. The walk was 2 blocks and took 4 minutes, and it was the strangest 4 minutes Seraphine had experienced in 7 years of strange minutes, moving through the ordinary morning foot traffic of Astoria. A woman with a stroller, 2 teenagers with coffee, a man walking a dog who nearly tripped on his own leash, with a 6-year-old between them holding Percy by one ear and asking Cassian what happened to his face. "I walked into something," he said. "What kind of something?" "The sharp kind." Leora considered this with the seriousness of a judge. "You should look where you're going." "I'm working on it." They reached the SUV. A man got out of the passenger seat, mid-40s, built wide, hair cut short enough to show a scar running from his left ear to the base of his jaw. He looked at Seraphine the way people look at things they didn't expect to find. Not hostile, recalibrating. "This is Pell," Cassian said. "He's been with me for 3 years. 4, Pell said, without any particular emphasis. 4. He knows what Roman is. A pause that carried weight. He doesn't know the rest. Yet. Pell held the back door open and Seraphine put Leora in first and climbed in after, and Cassian came around to the other side, and the SUV pulled into traffic, and wild ivy flowers disappeared in the side mirror behind them, the hand-painted sign and the window display, and the 7 years of careful, ordinary life folding away like something in a dream that loses resolution as you wake. Leora fell asleep inside 12 minutes. She simply ran out of adrenaline and tipped sideways against Seraphine's arm the way children do, completely and without negotiation, the stuffed rabbit crushed to her chest. Cassian watched it happen from the other side of the back seat. He looked away before Seraphine could read his face. She read it anyway. They drove north. The road climbed away from the coast and the morning fog stayed below them, pressing against the tree line. Nobody spoke for almost 20 minutes, which was fine, because everything they needed to say was too large for a moving vehicle with a sleeping child in it. Pell drove. The other man in the front passenger seat, who Cassian had not introduced, stared at his phone. "Safe house is 40 minutes, Cassian said finally, quietly. "Former fish processing plant outside Warrenton. I bought it through a front 18 months ago. Roman doesn't have the paper trail." "Roman has most of the paper trails," Seraphine said. "Not this one. The shell company is 3 layers deep and the final entity is registered in a name he'd have no reason to cross-reference." "What name?" A pause. "Maddox Holdings." She turned and looked at him. He was looking out his window. "I kept tabs," he said, "after the first year. I didn't know where you were, but I had your name and I built infrastructure under it because—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter why." "Tell me anyway." He turned then and looked at her directly, and the morning light was unkind in the way it showed everything. "Because I didn't believe it," he said. "Not completely. Not after the first year. There were things that didn't hold together, and I spent 12 months ignoring them, and then I stopped ignoring them, and by then you were gone, and I had no thread to pull." His voice was even. "The company was the only thing I could do that felt like something. I don't know." Seraphine looked at her sleeping daughter. "I built a tunnel out of the back of the shop," she said. "I know, I found it. I trained with exit strategies twice a year." "I noticed." "I hated you for 6 years," she said. "Not with heat, just accurately." "I know," he said. "And then I stopped, which was worse." He didn't answer that. The safe house was a low, wide structure set back from the road behind a tree line, the kind of building that had been functional once and gone gray and angular and unremarkable. The inside was better than the outside. Cassian's people had clearly been operating out of it for some time. There were tables with laptops and maps and printed photographs pinned to a corkboard that took up most of one wall. A coffee maker. Cots in the side room. Someone had stocked the refrigerator with food that included, incongruously, a box of apple juice boxes, the kind with the cartoon fish on them. Leora woke up when the car stopped, looked at the fish box apple juice with pure, uncomplicated joy, and decided the place was acceptable. Seraphine settled her at the far end of the table with juice and crackers, and Percy and the drawing supplies she'd packed in the go bag, always in the go bag, always. And then she walked to the corkboard and looked at it. 8 months of Roman's movements, transaction records, Photographs taken at distance, the grain of long lens work. 3 names she recognized and 6 she didn't. A timeline that started 8 months ago when Cassian had found the transfer record and moved forward in careful increments to the present day. And there, in the bottom right corner, a photograph she had not expected. Her own shop, taken from the street. The angle suggested the bench across from the flower display, which meant it had been taken at sitting height, which meant he'd sent someone to sit on that bench and photograph wild ivy. The date stamp in the corner was 11 weeks ago. "You had surveillance on my shop for 11 weeks, she said. Not a question. "I had surveillance on Roman's surveillance on your shop," Cassian said, coming up beside her. "He's had eyes on you for 4 months. I didn't know you were there until I saw his man watching." She turned to face him. "You've known I was here for 11 weeks. "Yes." "And you came yesterday." "Yes." She let the silence hold that for a moment. "Why yesterday, and not the day you found out?" He reached past her and unpinned a photograph. A man she didn't recognize, broad-shouldered, photographed entering a building in what looked like downtown Portland. Because 10 days ago, Roman met with this man, Gregor Fain. He runs enforcement for 3 West Coast families that aren't ours. That meeting is what made Roman move up his timeline and come to you directly. He set the photograph down. If Fain is backing Roman, he's not just trying to take my position. He's trying to restructure everything, and he needs the notebook to remove the last pieces that could be used against him legally, which means he needs it before those families formally commit. A pause. Which is what the 48 hours is actually about. Seraphine took that in. "You let him go to me first," she said slowly. "Yesterday. You were 40 minutes behind him. You could have intercepted him on the road." "Yes." "You let him deliver the threat and leave so you could watch what he did after." "Yes." "And what did he do after?" "He made a call on a secure line to Fain, 30 seconds. Then he got on the road back to Portland." "You have his secure line." "I have one of his secure lines." A pause. "He has others I don't have yet." She looked at him. "That's why you need the notebook. The records in it would give you the other lines." Among other things, Seraphine walked away from the corkboard. She stood in the middle of the room and pressed her fingertips against her temples and breathed, counted the breaths, 3 in, 3 out, the way she'd taught herself in the first year. And then she turned around. "My brother," she said, "tell me you have something on the facility." "I have a name, Hargrove Recovery, registered as a private rehabilitation center. Address is 31 miles outside Portland, off 26. It's real. It operates as an actual facility, which is how Roman keeps it off the radar because there are legitimate patients there. How many people does Roman have inside? Based on transaction records, he has 2 people on payroll there. Not orderlies, administrative positions, which means access without visibility. Darian doesn't know he can leave, she said, or he's been told things that make him believe he can't. Cassian's voice was careful. We don't know his psychological state. 6 years in any kind of institutional setting. He's my brother, she said. I know his psychological state. She said it too sharply, and it landed in the room wrong. Pell, who had been standing near the coffee maker, looked at his hands. The unnamed man in the passenger seat suddenly needed to be in a different part of the building and found his way there. Cassian didn't flinch. Okay, he said quietly. Tell me. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected him to push back or redirect or wait her out. The question sat in the air between them, and she found unexpectedly that she wanted to answer it. He's stubborn, she said. Holds things in, then detonates. Bad at asking for help. Good at appearing fine. She paused. He was getting better before. He'd been clean 14 months when Roman took him. He had a job, a girl he liked. He was... She stopped. He was getting somewhere. He'll get somewhere again, Cassian said. You don't know that. No, he admitted. But I'm going to say it until it's true. She looked at him for a long moment. You can't do that. I'm aware it's a character flaw. Pell appeared from somewhere with 2 mugs of coffee. He set them on the table near the corkboard with the air of a man completing a diplomatic mission and removed himself again. Seraphine sat down. Cassian sat across from her. At the far end of the table, Leora had begun drawing what appeared to be a detailed portrait of Percy and was narrating his backstory under her breath. "The notebook," Cassian said. "Walk me through what's in it." She pulled it from her jacket. It was small, dark green, held shut with a rubber band that had been replaced 3 times over 7 years. She set it on the table, but kept her fingers on the cover. "Transaction records," she said. 63 entries linking Roman to accounts that predate his official position with the syndicate by 4 years. That's the financial history of his actual operation versus the one he presented. She turned the cover. 3 contract records in his own handwriting. He was meticulous, which was always his worst quality. He wrote everything down and then convinced himself the records were secure. These cover the Hale contract, the Breslin contract, and a third I only identified 18 months ago. "What's the third?" She looked at him. "Your father's driver. The one who died in the accident 2 years before your father took ill." A pause. It wasn't an accident. Something moved through Cassian's face and then went very still. "Roman needed your father slowed down and isolated," Seraphine said. "The driver was his link to 3 people in law enforcement who were working a quiet investigation. With the driver gone, that investigation lost its source and went cold." She kept her voice even. "It cost something. The accident took out the investigation and separated your father from the people who might have warned him. After that, Roman spent 18 months moving pieces into position." "My father trusted him for 12 years, Cassian said. "I know. He was at our table every major holiday." "I know." Cassian stood up. He walked to the far wall and stood there with his back to the room and his hands at his sides, and Seraphine watched the line of his shoulders and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that would cost less than silence. After a moment, he turned around. His face was arranged. "What's the last item in the notebook?" he said. "A recording." She flipped to the back page where a small envelope had been taped to the inside cover. Inside the envelope, a micro SD card in a protective case. "Your father made it 14 months before he died. He'd started to suspect something. Not the full picture, but enough that he wanted a record. He named Roman specifically, 3 counts of contract killing, 1 count of financial fraud structured to implicate his own son." She set the card on the table. "He didn't know about me or Darian, but he knew Roman was building something, and he was afraid he wouldn't be believed." Cassian sat back down heavily. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Darian. He found it in a safety deposit box your father maintained under a name your father used in his early 20s. Yeah, before the syndicate, before everything. Darian was doing a job for me, tracking legacy accounts, and he found it 3 weeks before Roman took him." She paused. "Roman figured out Darian had it. That's why he took him instead of killing him. He needed to know if copies existed." "Do they?" 2. One with an attorney in Portland under sealed instructions. One. She stopped. Cassian looked at her steadily, waiting. "One I sent to a federal investigator 14 months ago," she said. "Encrypted, no return information. They have it, but they can't use it without the originals and corroborating testimony." A beat. "Which is why Roman needs the notebook destroyed and needs me and Darian and the attorney dealt with before that investigator gets enough to move formally." The weight of that settled over the room. "He's not trying to delay," Cassian said. "He's trying to close every door before they can be opened." "Yes, the 48 hours isn't a negotiation window. It's a demolition schedule." "Yes." Pell appeared in the doorway. He had a phone in his hand and his face had done something new. Not alarmed exactly, but tightened. "We have a problem," he said. "Define problem," Cassian said. "Hargrove recovery." Pell looked at his phone, then at Cassian. "I had someone watching the facility since we got here. 20 minutes ago, 2 vehicles arrived. Not staff vehicles, wrong plates. They went in and they haven't come out." He paused. "Roman's moved up his timeline." Seraphine was on her feet before he finished the sentence. "He's going to move Darian," she said. "Or worse," Pell said, and then stopped, because Leora was at the end of the table and had stopped narrating Percy's backstory. Seraphine looked at her daughter. Leora was watching with the large, quiet attention of a child who has learned that certain adult conversations require stillness. "Pack Percy," Seraphine told her. Her voice was steady. We're going for a drive. Another drive? Leora asked. Yes, baby. Can I bring my drawing? Yes. Leora packed Percy and the drawing with great seriousness, tucking both into the bag with the care of someone preserving documents of state. Cassian came to stand beside Seraphine, close enough that she could feel the tension in him, but not close enough to demand anything. If we move now, we can beat them to a transfer, he said quietly, but it means going in without a full plan. I've been going in without a full plan for 7 years, she said. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. She picked up the notebook, looked at the corkboard, looked at the micro SD card still on the table. We go for Darien first. Everything else is downstream of that. If Roman moves him, we lose our leverage and we lose the one person who can corroborate the recording in person. Agreed. And we need the attorney safe. Portland, you said? Pell can handle that remotely. He has someone. And Leora needs... I have somewhere, Cassian said. There's a woman in Astoria I trust completely. She's not connected to anything. She can take Leora for however long this takes. Seraphine looked at him sharply. You trust completely. Her name is Agnes. She's 71 years old and she used to be my father's housekeeper for 23 years, and she moved here after he died because she had family here. He paused. She doesn't know what I do. She just knows I call her every month to make sure she's all right, and that once I drove 4 hours to fix her roof when she couldn't get anyone else. Seraphine stared at him. What? He said. Nothing, she said, and meant it. They were loading the SUV when Pell's phone rang again. He answered it, listened for 11 seconds, and then said, Understood, and hung up and looked at Cassian with the expression of a man delivering news he doesn't want to deliver. The 2 men from the shop, he said. The ones Cassian left in the storage room. What about them? Cassian said. My contact in Astoria PD just called, responding to a report of disturbance at Wild Ivy. Pell paused. The storage room was empty. They got out. Roman knows we moved, Seraphine said. Roman knows you didn't give him the notebook, Pell said, and he knows Cassian was there. The 3 of them stood in the thin morning light outside the fish processing plant, and the implications of that landed one by one the way they always did. First the obvious, then the secondary, then the one underneath that made everything worse. Cassian looked at Seraphine. He'll assume we're going for Darien. He'll get there first, she said. He'll use Darien to draw us in. Yes. Which means we're walking into whatever Roman prepares. Yes. She thought about Darien at 21 outside a diner, squinting against the sun. She thought about a micro SD card and a dead man's voice on it, recording the truth in a room because he was afraid no one would believe him. She thought about the tile in the back office of a flower shop she would probably never walk into again. Okay, she said. She opened the SUV door for Leora. Then we walk in anyway. Cassian looked at her with something she hadn't seen on his face in 7 years. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the precursor to it. Recognition. The kind that costs something. Yeah, he said. We do. They drove south toward Portland in 2 vehicles through the breaking morning, Roman Vescari somewhere ahead of them on the same road, the notebook in Seraphine's jacket, and a dead man's voice on a card the size of a thumbnail, and 31 miles outside the city, a man named Darien Maddox sat reading a history book in a room with institutional lighting, unaware that the next 4 hours would determine whether the life Roman had described to him, contained, safe, permanent, was the one he'd keep or the one he'd burn. He turned the page. Outside his window, 2 vehicles he didn't recognize idled in the facility parking lot with their engines running. They reached the outer perimeter of Hargrove Recovery at 11:47 in the morning, which was 40 minutes faster than the route should have allowed, and had required Pell to drive in a way that nobody in either vehicle commented on. The facility was set back from Route 26 behind a long gravel access road lined with Douglas firs that were old enough to make the building look like it had grown from the ground rather than been constructed. From the outside, it looked exactly like what it claimed to be. Low, clean, institutional, but not unkind, with a garden visible through a chain-link fence on the east side where patients were presumably encouraged to experience controlled amounts of nature. A small sign near the entrance read, Hargrove Recovery Center in tasteful letters that suggested healing without specificity. The two vehicles with wrong plates were still in the parking lot. They hadn't moved. Cassian's SUV stopped at the tree line. The second vehicle, carrying the two men from the safe house whose names Seraphine still didn't know, pulled alongside. "Both vehicles," Pell said. "Still there? Nobody's come out in the last hour." "Which means they're either waiting or they're already done," Cassian said. "If they were done, they'd have left," Seraphine said. She was looking at the building's east face. "Roman wouldn't leave vehicles at a location he'd already compromised. He's meticulous." "So they're waiting," Pell said. "They're waiting for us," she said. "Roman knew we'd come here. He had time to set this up, and he used it." Cassian looked at her. "Which means Darian is still inside." "Which means Darian is bait." The word sat in the vehicle and did what words like that do. "How do you want to play it?" Cassian said. Seraphine had been studying the building's layout since they stopped. Ground floor, 12 windows on the south face, 6 on the east. One main entrance, one service entrance visible on the west side where a delivery structure jutted from the building. The garden gate on the east was padlocked, but the fence was chain link and 6 feet, which was a problem but not a permanent one. "The service entrance," she said. "If Roman's people are positioned for the main entrance and watching the parking lot, they're expecting a frontal approach or a vehicle." "So we don't give them one," Cassian said. "I go in through the service entrance alone. I find Darian, I get him mobile. You create a reason for their attention to go to the front. Define reason." One vehicle, one person, drives in and parks. Visible, unhurried, like someone who belongs. The moment their eyes go front, "You're already inside." Cassian looked at Pell. Pell shrugged with the resignation of someone who has learned that plans involving the words, "I go in alone," don't improve through argument. "No," Cassian said, turning back to Seraphine. "Not alone. I'm faster alone. You don't know the building. I'll learn it." "Seraphine." He said her name the way you say something you've been holding carefully for a long time and are now setting down. "I'm not letting you go in there alone." She looked at him, felt something move in her chest that she didn't have time for, and set it aside the same way she'd set aside the cedar-wrapped bracelet. "Then you're with me," she said. "Pell takes the vehicle to the front." "Works for me," Pell said, already opening his door. "Take Chen," Cassian said, and the unnamed man from the passenger seat of the second vehicle apparently had a name and responded to it by appearing at the window with the expression of someone who expected to be asked to do something inadvisable. "Front entrance. Walk in as if you have an appointment. Stall. Ask for the director, ask about admissions, ask for a glass of water. I don't care. 60 seconds is all we need." Chen nodded, looked at Pell. They moved. Cassian and Seraphine went east on foot through the tree line, staying parallel to the fence. The ground was wet and soft and quiet underfoot, which was good. The Douglas firs were dense enough that the parking lot wasn't visible from where they moved, which meant the reverse was also true. They reached the service entrance from the north side, a metal door set into a loading dock structure, currently closed but not padlocked. Cassian tried it. It opened without resistance. "Too easy," Seraphine said. "Yes," he said. "I know." They went in anyway. The service corridor was narrow, fluorescent lit, smelling of industrial cleaning solution and something underneath it, cooked food, old building, the particular closed air quality of a place where the windows don't open. Supply carts lined the left wall, a laundry room on the right, machines running, nobody inside. Ahead, the corridor branched. Seraphine pulled out the facility layout she'd photographed from a county records database at the safe house. Not official, but a building permit filing from 6 years ago that showed the basic floor plan. She oriented it. Patient rooms are east wing, second floor. Stairs should be 30 meters ahead, left branch. They moved at a pace that was fast without being running, the specific tempo of people who belong somewhere and are simply in a hurry. The corridor was empty. They reached the stairs. Started up. The second floor landing opened onto a hallway that smelled different, cleaner, more medical, the faint residue of whatever they used to keep institutional linoleum. Looking institutional. 6 doors on each side. A nursing station 20 meters ahead, currently occupied by a single woman in scrubs who was looking at a computer and had her back partially to the hallway. Cassian put a hand on Seraphine's arm. They stopped. The nursing station was between them and the east end of the hall, where, according to the permit filing, the rooms with the longest occupancy were located. Darian would be in one of those. Probably one of the last three on the right, which had the smallest windows and the most distance from the stairwell. The rooms you put someone in when you wanted them to feel that departure was a theoretical concept. "I'll take the station," Seraphine said. She walked to the nursing station with the confident, unhurried stride of someone who knew exactly where they were going and why. And when the woman at the computer turned, Seraphine was already presenting her phone with a document on it. One of the identity documents from the go bag, paired with a fabricated referral letter she'd prepared 14 months ago for exactly this category of contingency. "Family visit," she said. "Darian Maddox. I called ahead last week. There may have been a miscommunication with the scheduling." The nurse looked at the document, looked at Seraphine, looked at the document again. People who work in facilities like this one are trained to be cautious and also trained to be accommodating, which creates a specific internal conflict that usually resolves toward accommodation when the person in front of them is calm and presentable and has paperwork. "I don't have a visit on file for today," the nurse said. "I understand. Like I said, there may have been a miscommunication. I drove from Astoria." She said it with the particular weight of someone who has driven a long way and is being reasonable about it and would prefer not to have to escalate. The nurse reached for her phone. To call someone or to check something. It didn't matter which, because at that moment a sound came from the far end of the hall. Not loud, not dramatic. A thump, and then another, and then a voice. Male, controlled, the voice of someone giving an instruction they expected to be followed. That came through the door of the last room on the right. The nurse turned toward the sound. Seraphine moved around the station. She was at the last door in 4 strides and opened it without knocking and took in the room in the first half second the way she'd trained herself to take in rooms. 2 men standing, one near the window, one near the bed. A third figure sitting on the bed with his hands in his lap and his shoulders set in the particular posture of someone who has decided not to give whoever is in the room the satisfaction of watching them flinch. Darian Maddox looked up. He had gray in his hair, more than the photograph had shown. His face was fuller, older, carrying 6 years in the lines around his mouth and eyes. But his expression when he saw her, the thing that happened in the first instant before he could arrange his face into something controlled, was something she would spend years trying to find language for and never quite manage. "Sarah," he said. "It came out wrong. Too small." The man by the window moved first. He moved toward her, and Cassian came through the door behind her and intersected him before he completed the motion. And the man by the bed went for something inside his jacket, and Darian, who had apparently spent 6 years in a facility but had not lost certain instincts, came off the bed sideways and hit him with a shoulder that was more effective than elegant and bought the 2 seconds Cassian needed to deal with Window Man and turn. The room was very loud for about 8 seconds, and then it was very quiet. Both men were on the floor. Darian was standing beside his bed, breathing hard, staring at Cassian with the expression of someone who has just processed one too many pieces of information in rapid succession. "Who the hell is this?" he said. "Later," Seraphine said. "That's a great answer, Sarah, but Darian." She crossed the room and put her hands on his face the way you do with someone you have spent 6 years believing was beyond reach. And he went silent immediately. She looked at him. He was real. He was present. He was here. "Later," she said again more gently. "I promise. But right now we need to move." He nodded. Something in him settled deep, not calm, but the decision to trust. They moved. The corridor was no longer empty. The nurse from the station was on her phone at the far end, which was a problem, but a manageable one because she was blocking herself rather than the stairs. Cassian went ahead. Seraphine kept Darian between them, and they made the stairwell in 15 seconds, and the service corridor in 40, and the service door in another 30, and then they were outside in the wet, cold Douglas fir air and moving north along the fence line toward the tree line, and a sound from the parking lot. Not from inside the building, from outside. Seraphine stopped. Cassian stopped. Darian ran into Cassian's back and said something under his breath. From the parking lot, on the south face of the building, came the particular sound of multiple car doors opening and closing in rapid succession. Not Pell and Chen. Too many doors. Wrong rhythm. Cassian had his phone out. He called Pell. It rang 4 times and then went to a holding message. He called Chen. Same result. The look that passed between him and Seraphine contained everything that needed to be said about what 4 unanswered calls meant. "Run," Cassian said. They ran. The tree line was 60 meters, and they crossed it in the wrong amount of time because Darian had not run anywhere in 6 years and was running in facility-issued shoes that were not designed for wet ground. And behind them, the sound of voices from the parking lot multiplied and then stabilized and then went in a direction that was not toward them, which was wrong. If Roman's people had seen them exit, pursuit should have been immediate. They reached the vehicles. Cassian's SUV was where they'd left it. The second vehicle was gone. Pell's phone went to the holding message again. Cassian stood at the tree line with the phone in his hand and his face doing something Seraphine had not seen on it before. Not fear. Worse than fear. The specific look of a man who has begun to recalculate something at a fundamental level. "Where's Pell?" Darian said, because he had no context and the question seemed reasonable to him. Nobody answered. They drove. Cassian drove, which meant Pell's absence was real enough that the normal order of things had suspended. He drove north on 26 and then cut east on a road that was not the road back to the safe house, because the safe house had been Pell's operation, and if Pell was compromised, the safe house was compromised, and they needed somewhere else. And the somewhere else turned out to be a motel outside of Scappoose that accepted cash and had the particular character of a place that had stopped asking questions sometime in the previous decade. 1 room, 2 beds, a bathroom with a shower that took 3 minutes to produce warm water. Darian sat on the edge of one bed and looked at his sister for a long time. "You're alive," he said. "Yes." "You've been alive the whole time." "Yes." His jaw worked. "Roman told me you were dead. He showed me a death record. I saw it. It had your name on it, your date of birth, everything." "Roman is thorough," she said. "He told me you died in a car accident 14 months after I came to the facility." Darian's voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him something visible. "He came to tell me in person. He sat across from me and looked me in the eye and told me my sister was dead." The room was very quiet. "I know," she said. "Sarah." Something broke open in his voice. Not all the way, just a crack. "I stopped trying to leave because of that. I stopped asking questions. I thought there was nothing to go back to." She sat beside him on the bed and put her hand over his and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would address 6 years, that would give them back, that would undo the version of events Roman had maintained with such precision across such a long time. Darian looked at Cassian, who was standing near the window with his arms crossed and his eyes on the parking lot. "Who is he?" "Cassian Draven," she said. A silence. A different quality of silence. "The same Cassian Draven," Darian said carefully. "Yes." Darian looked at Cassian for a long moment with the expression of a man reviewing something he'd been told versus something he was seeing. "You were supposed to have ordered the hit on me." "I didn't," Cassian said. He said it without turning from the window. "Roman showed me a transaction record. Roman fabricated a transaction record." A pause. "The same way he fabricated evidence that your sister had ordered the death of a man I considered family." He turned from the window. "I spent 7 years believing she was responsible. She spent 7 years believing I was responsible for you. Roman spent 7 years running an empire he built on those 2 beliefs." Darian looked at Seraphine. She met his eyes. "The notebook," he said. "I have it." "And the recording." "I have it." He exhaled. It was a long, fractured sound, the exhale of someone who has been holding something for a very long time. "I found that recording by accident," he said. "I didn't even know what it was at first. I thought it was a standard financial record, old account, wrong name. But there was a voice file attached to one of the entries, and I played it, and—" He stopped. The man on that recording, he sounded afraid, not afraid for himself, afraid that no one would believe him. No one did, Cassian said quietly. Not while he was alive. He was your father. Yes. Darian absorbed that. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Cassian looked at him for a moment and then nodded once, the kind of nod that closes a door gently. Seraphine's phone, the prepaid, buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. She answered. You move fast, Roman Vescari said. I'll give you that. Her entire body went cold and then very still. Across the room, Cassian read her face and was at her side in 4 steps. She put the phone between them so he could hear. Where's Pell? Cassian said. Mr. Pell is comfortable, Roman said. He's been comfortable for 3 weeks, actually. He's been very helpful. The thing that happened to Cassian's face in that moment was not something Seraphine could describe in language that would do it justice. It was the specific devastation of a man discovering that something he believed was solid ground had been hollow the entire time he'd been standing on it. 4 years. He'd said 4 years. He's been feeding you our movements, Cassian said. His voice was completely flat. Since before you found the transfer record, Roman said. Pell brought that record to your attention, in fact. I needed you moving in a specific direction at a specific speed, and Pell was very capable of providing that. A pause. The timeline, the safe house, your surveillance on Wild Ivy, all of it has been visible to me. You built an 8-month investigation with a structural flaw at its foundation, and everything you built sits on top of that flaw. Seraphine thought about the corkboard, the photographs. The 8 months of documentation that Pell had been present for, had contributed to, had helped shape into a narrative that pointed exactly where Roman needed it to point. What do you want? She said. What I've always wanted. The notebook, the recording, and the attorney in Portland. Deliver those 3 things to the address I'm about to send you, and your brother goes home, Cassian's former bodyguard is released, and we all agree that the Draven Syndicate is now structured differently than it was this morning. A pause. Refuse. And I send the conversation I've been having with a federal contact for the past week, the one that implicates Cassian in 6 active criminal operations using documentation Pell has provided, to 3 separate news outlets simultaneously. By morning, Cassian is not a problem I need to manage. He's a problem the federal government manages for me. Seraphine looked at Cassian. Cassian was looking at the wall. 6 hours, Roman said. Same address. The line went dead. The motel room was silent except for the shower in the bathroom cycling down, finished producing its warm water for no one. Darian said, "Tell me what just happened." Neither of them answered immediately. Seraphine was watching Cassian. He hadn't moved. He was still looking at the wall, and she recognized what he was doing because she had done it herself multiple times in the back office of a flower shop in Astoria. She was watching him dismantle something, not emotionally, architecturally, taking apart the structure of 8 months and examining each component through the new lens of knowing that the person who'd helped him build it had been working against him the entire time. Pell was Roman's, Cassian said finally. Yes, she said. Everything I have on Roman, he knows about it. Yes. The attorney, Roman knows about her. He said he did. A muscle worked in Cassian's jaw. Chen. Probably also compromised, or taken. Either way, assume it. He turned from the wall. His face was arranged with the precision of someone who has learned through long practice that if you let the structure of your expression collapse, the structure of your thinking collapses with it, and he could not afford that right now. He's given us 6 hours, Cassian said. As a courtesy, Seraphine said, or as a mechanism. If we use the 6 hours to try to rebuild a plan and execute it, we're operating without assets, without infrastructure, and without the advantage of Roman not knowing our location. She paused. He knows where we are. Then why hasn't he moved? Because he doesn't want us taken. He wants us to deliver. She looked at the prepaid phone. Which tells me something. That he's still afraid of the notebook. That he's afraid of what happens if someone else gets the notebook. He needs us to bring it to him because he can't risk us destroying it or sending it somewhere he can't intercept before he controls the outcome. She set the phone down. He needs us compliant. Not because he can't take us, he can, but because taking us messily creates evidence of exactly the kind of operation the federal investigator is already building a case toward. Darian had been quiet for a long time. He spoke now. "There's something you don't know," he said. They both looked at him. He looked older in the motel light, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the events of the past 2 hours. "When I found the recording," he said carefully, "there was something else in that account. Not the recording, not the transaction history." He looked at his hands. "A name, a contact. Someone your father maintained a private correspondence with outside of syndicate channels. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I wrote it down and kept it because I kept everything that seemed like it might matter." He looked at Cassian. "Does the name Margaret Foss mean anything to you?" Something moved through Cassian's expression, fast, there and then controlled. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. "Your father's account. They exchanged correspondence for 9 years. The last message was dated 2 months before his death. He told her—" Darian paused. "He told her if anything happened to him, she had everything she needed." "Margaret Foss is dead," Cassian said. "She died 4 years ago. She was—" He stopped. Seraphine looked at him. "Who was she?" He was quiet for 3 full seconds. "She was a federal judge," he said. "She presided over organized crime cases for 18 years. She retired 6 years ago for health reasons and died 2 years after that. A beat. My father knew her because she prosecuted a case against the syndicate 20 years ago. He testified in that case, against his own people, under an alias, as part of an agreement that was never fully honored." His voice had gone very flat. "Nobody knew about that testimony. It was sealed. The alias was sealed. Everything about that arrangement was sealed." "Except your father told her he had evidence," Seraphine said. "And a federal judge who's been sitting on a sealed agreement for 20 years. Doesn't stop being a federal judge when she retires," Darian said. "She can designate a successor. She can leave instructions." He reached into the pocket of the facility-issued pants he was still wearing and produced a folded piece of paper. It had been folded so many times the creases were worn nearly through. "I found a copy of their last correspondence," he said. "I memorized it and wrote it down from memory because the original was in the account, and I didn't know if I'd ever get back to it." He held the paper out to Cassian. "She told your father that if the evidence ever surfaced and he couldn't be there to present it, there was a second copy of his testimony. The full version, unredacted, held by her clerk, a man named Aldous Webb. She told your father that Aldous would know what to do." Cassian took the paper, read it. His hands were completely steady. "Aldous Webb," he said. "Does that mean something?" Seraphine asked. He looked up from the paper. "He's not a clerk anymore," Cassian said. "He's been with the Department of Justice for 9 years. A pause. "He's the federal investigator you sent the encrypted copy to 14 months ago." The motel room did something that rooms sometimes do in the moments after a significant piece of information lands. It seemed to hold its breath, the hum of the heating unit and the distant sound of traffic on Route 30 temporarily receding into something like silence. Seraphine's mind moved through it fast. Aldous Webb had the encrypted copy. He had held it without the context to use it for 14 months. He had a sealed record of Cassian's father's testimony, the full version, unredacted, that connected to Roman Vescari in ways that went back 2 decades. What he lacked was the original notebook, the original recording, and a living witness who could corroborate. What he had was the infrastructure of the Department of Justice. "If Webb gets the originals," she said slowly, "and corroborating testimony from Darian, Roman's financial fabrication against me collapses," Cassian said. "The 6 operations Pell documented, every one of those can be traced back to Roman's direction through the notebook records. It doesn't protect me from everything, but it removes the framing and gives Webb enough to move on Roman before the families formally commit to Fane." "We need to reach Webb," she said. "In 6 hours, without Pell, without Chen, without any infrastructure Roman hasn't already seen. And without being taken by whoever Roman has watching this motel." Cassian looked at the window, at the parking lot beyond the curtain, at the door with its inadequate chain lock. "How do you know he has someone watching?" Darian said. "Because he told us to deliver," Seraphine said. If you want someone to deliver, you watch where they are so you know the moment they stop moving toward you. She was already at the window, standing to the side where she could see the lot without being visible from it. Two cars she hadn't seen when they pulled in, one near the entrance, one angled toward the road. East side of the lot, she said. Gray sedan. The man behind the wheel hasn't moved since we got here. Cassian came to look. There's a second one near the road. Yes. So we can't move from this room without being tracked. Not by car. She stepped back from the window. But there's a tree line behind the motel. I saw it when we parked. Darian looked between them. You're both going to do something very inadvisable, he said. I can tell because you both got the same look. We need 45 minutes, Seraphine said. Webb's office in Portland. It's 40 minutes from here if the road is clear. You go on foot through a tree line to where? Darian said. There's a gas station 3/4 of a mile north. I saw it on the way in. She looked at Cassian. The car stays. Roman's people watch the car. We're on foot through the tree line before they register the room is empty. And while you're doing that, Darian said carefully, what exactly am I doing? You're in the room, she said. In the room, he repeated, with the heat running and the television on and the light coming under the bathroom door. She looked at him steadily. They're watching for movement. A still room with light and sound buys us 30 minutes before anyone looks closer. Darian sat with this for a moment. I spent 6 years being kept somewhere for my own protection, he said. And now I'm being asked to sit in a motel room while my sister goes through a tree line. Yes, she said. That is a spectacular irony. Darian, he looked at her, at the gray in his own hair, or what he knew of it, at the room, at Cassian, at the folded paper now in Cassian's hand that had traveled from an account to a memory, to a piece of paper, to this motel room in whatever sequence of small miracles and stubborn acts of faith had brought it here. Go, he said. They went through the bathroom window because it faced north, and the north side of the motel backed directly onto the tree line she'd identified. And the drop from the window was 6 feet onto wet ground, and she landed it cleanly and Cassian landed it cleanly, and they moved into the trees without looking back. The cold air coming in off the river, the sound of Route 30 to the west, and the gray sky pressing down through the canopy above them. They moved fast and didn't speak, and the gas station appeared through the trees in 40 minutes exactly, and there was a man behind the counter inside who looked at them with the particular lack of curiosity of someone who has worked a remote gas station for long enough that he has stopped being surprised by what comes out of the trees. Cassian had Webb's number from a contact record he'd maintained separately from Pell's infrastructure. One of the threads he'd pulled in the first months of his investigation before Pell had become the primary operative. He dialed it from Seraphine's prepaid, and it rang twice. Webb, said a voice on the other end. Clipped, professional. My name is Cassian Draven, Cassian said. I have originals of the evidence you received encrypted 14 months ago. I have a living witness who found it and can testify to chain of custody. And I have approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes before the man you've been trying to build a case against finalizes an alliance that puts him beyond the reach of most of what you could otherwise do. A pause. Tell me you're still trying to build that case. A silence on the line. Shorter than Seraphine expected. Where are you? Webb said. Cassian told him. Don't move, Webb said. I'm 40 minutes out. The line went dead. Seraphine stood in the gas station parking lot with the prepaid phone in her hand and the tree line behind her, and somewhere back in a motel room, a man she'd believed was dead for 6 years was watching television with the heat running, and somewhere in Portland, a consigliere named Roman Vescari was counting down hours toward a version of events he believed he had already secured. She thought about the last thing in the notebook she hadn't told Cassian yet. The thing she'd found 18 months ago and had been carrying since, not because she didn't trust him. She hadn't trusted him then, couldn't have, but because it was the piece that could destroy him as easily as it could save him, depending on how the truth landed. She looked at him standing 3 feet from her in the gray light outside a gas station off Route 30, his father's voice on a card in his jacket pocket, everything he'd believed about his own history dismantled to its studs. She thought, he needs to know before Webb arrives. She thought, there's no version of this where it doesn't hurt him. There's one more thing in the notebook, she said. He turned. The night your father died, she said, The attending physician. He filed a standard report. Natural causes, cardiac event, consistent with his existing condition. She held his gaze. Roman paid him. The report was fabricated. Your father didn't die of his heart. Cassian didn't speak for a long time. He stood in the gas station parking lot with the cold coming off the tree line and his hands at his sides and his face doing nothing. That was the thing that was hardest to watch, like not an expression of grief or rage, or the particular crumbling that happens when something load-bearing gives way. Just nothing. The deliberate, costly nothing of a man who has learned that showing the full weight of a thing gives whoever delivered it too much. Seraphine waited. A truck pulled into the lot, filled up, left. The man behind the counter inside didn't look at them. How? Cassian said finally. One word. Digitalis compound introduced over 6 weeks. The attending misread or chose to misread the cardiac markers as consistent with his existing arrhythmia. She kept her voice even. It would have been undetectable without specific testing that nobody ordered because nobody had reason to order it. Roman had managed his medical care for the last 8 months of his life, arranged the specialist, the medication management, all of it through a physician he controlled. He was with him, Cassian said. At the end, he called me. He told me. He stopped. I know. He was in the room. Yes. Something moved through Cassian's jaw. His hands at his sides closed and then opened and then were still. That's everything, he said. Not a question, confirming. That's everything in the notebook. He nodded once, looked at the road, looked at the tree line, looked nowhere particular. Then we give Webb what he needs and we finish this, he said. His voice had a new quality. Not rage, not grief, but the thing that forms on the other side of both of those when there's still a task in front of you, and the task is the only available container for everything you can't yet afford to feel. Yes, she said. All of it. The notebook, the recording, Darian's testimony, the physician's name. We give Webb everything, and we let him move. There's still the problem of Roman's timeline, she said. If Fane commits to him in the next few hours, Webb needs something to move on before that happens, or the window closes, and Roman restructures behind the alliance. Then we don't let the window close. Cassian, Roman is expecting a delivery, he said. He's watching the motel and counting down 6 hours and expecting us to either comply or stall while he finalizes the Fane arrangement. He turned and looked at her directly. What if we give him what he's expecting? She looked at him. You want to walk in? I want to walk into whatever location he sent us, and I want to walk in with a version of the notebook that buys Webb the time he needs to move formally. Roman will want to verify the materials. That verification takes time, and during that time, Webb executes, she said slowly. Webb executes, and Roman is caught between the formal federal action on one side and the evidence going simultaneously to the rival families on the other. He loses Fane's support the moment Fane sees the financial records that prove Roman's been diverting funds from the collective arrangement. A pause. Roman built his power on everyone believing different things about him. The moment they all see the same truth simultaneously, his entire structure collapses before he can manage the narrative, she said. Yes. She thought about it. Thought about the address Roman had presumably sent to the prepaid. Thought about walking into a room Roman controlled with Cassian beside her, and a notebook in her hand, and Webb 40 minutes out. If Webb's timing is off by even 20 minutes, she said, we're inside Roman's location with no exit and no leverage. I know. And if Roman decides verification isn't worth the time, I know. He held her gaze. You don't have to go in. You can stay with Darian, get to Webb, give him what he needs. Don't, she said. I'm serious. So am I. Don't. She looked at the tree line, at the gray sky, at 7 years of contingency plans and exit tunnels and tiles in the floor of a back office, all of it adding up to this parking lot and this choice. I've been building toward this for 7 years. I'm not watching it from somewhere safe. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face shifted, that precursor she'd identified earlier, the thing that lived just ahead of warmth, closer now. Okay, he said. Webb arrived in 38 minutes in an unmarked sedan that looked exactly like every unmarked sedan that had ever existed. He was younger than Seraphine had imagined from the idea of him, early 40s, slight, with glasses and a coat that was too thin for the weather, and the expression of a man who has spent 9 years being careful and is currently in the process of deciding to be something else. He looked at Cassian. He looked at Seraphine. He looked at the notebook she held out to him. "I've had the encrypted copy for 14 months, he said. "I couldn't move without originals and without knowing the chain of custody." "You have originals now," she said. "And you have Darian Maddox, who found the recording in your predecessor's legacy account and can testify to every step of that discovery." She paused. "He's 3/4 of a mile south. He needs to be moved before Roman surveillance on the motel understands that the room is empty." Webb made a call. 2 minutes. He hung up. "Team is en route to the motel. Your brother will be in federal protective custody within 15 minutes. She exhaled. "The notebook," Webb said, opening it. He looked at the entries, the micro SD card in its envelope. His expression was the controlled expression of someone who has trained themselves not to show how significant a thing is until they've verified it, but something leaked through at the edges. "This is the physician's name." "He's still practicing," Seraphine said. "Portland. The documentation of the payment is on page 31. Webb looked at page 31. "I need 2 hours," he said. "Roman's deadline is 6, Cassian said. "We're going to walk in at the 5-hour mark. That gives you 1 hour of active operation before we're inside, and 1 hour of parallel pressure while we're keeping Roman occupied with verification." Webb looked at Cassian with the expression of someone evaluating a proposal that is inadvisable and also the best available option. "You understand that walking into that location makes you a witness in an active federal investigation." "I understand that," Cassian said, "which means everything that happens inside that location is subject to—" "I understand what it means." A pause. "Do you have enough to move on Fane?" "If the financial records in here show the diversion, I think they show. Yes." Fane's arrangement with Roman becomes a liability for him the moment this surfaces. He'll distance himself before the ink dries. Webb closed the notebook. 2 hours. Don't go in early. "We won't," Seraphine said. Webb left. They stood in the parking lot for a moment and then went inside the gas station and bought coffee that was terrible and drank it anyway because there was nothing else available, and they had 5 hours to move through before the end of everything. The address Roman had sent led them south, back toward Portland, off the main road, through an industrial district that ran along the river where the buildings were large and functional and the kind of old that comes from being used hard for decades. Warehouses, fabrication plants, a marine supply operation that had clearly been closed for years. At the end of the river road, set apart from the others by a chain-link perimeter and 2 working floodlights on tall poles, was a structure that had been a shipyard once and now was whatever Roman Viscari needed it to be. They drove past it once without stopping. 3 vehicles inside the perimeter, Cassian said. 2 men visible near the main entrance. At least 2 more positions in the upper structure, but you can see the sight lines from the roof line on the east side. "He brought people," Seraphine said. "He brought enough people to make a point. He turned the car around at the end of the road, or to cover multiple exits." "Both," she said. They parked a block north and went the rest of the way on foot. She had the clipping shears in her jacket pocket. She'd retrieved them from the SUV, a habit, the same way she'd always kept them, and nothing else that would be useful in a room with 4 armed men. Cassian had a 9mm he'd taken from one of the men in the flower shop's back room and had kept without discussing it. At the perimeter gate, she texted the number Roman had used. 2 words. "We're here." The gate opened. The 2 men at the entrance moved them through a scanner, efficient, professional, not rough, and removed Cassian's 9mm without comment and let them keep everything else, which told her Roman's people had missed the shears and also that Roman wanted this meeting to feel like a transaction rather than a capture. Inside, the shipyard was large and dim and smelled of rust and river water and old machinery that had been idle for years. Overhead gantries crossed the ceiling at intervals. Pools of work light illuminated specific areas, the central floor, a metal staircase leading to an upper level, a long table near the east wall where a man sat with 3 other men standing behind him. Roman Vescari looked exactly the same. That was the thing about Roman. He had the kind of face that time did nothing to. Not handsome exactly, but arranged with such precision that it resisted the ordinary deterioration of years. He wore a dark jacket. He had a glass of water in front of him. He did not stand when they entered. "You're early," he said. "Traffic was light," Cassian said. Roman looked at Seraphine. "You look tired," he said. 7 years in a flower shop in Oregon." He tilted his head slightly. "I did wonder sometimes what kind of life you were building, whether it was worth the trouble." A pause. "The child is Cassian's." "That's not why we're here," Seraphine said. "No." He set his hands flat on the table. "The notebook." She reached into her jacket and produced it, held it at her side without extending it. "Verification first," Roman said. He gestured to one of the men behind him, who came around the table and held out his hand. She didn't move. The man looked at Roman. Roman looked at her. "Seraphine." "The attorney first," she said. "Your arrangement with the Portland attorney ends before I hand you anything. I want confirmation she's been released from whatever arrangement you've established." "She was never—" "It wasn't a physical arrangement." Roman almost smiled. "She simply understood that her interests were aligned with maintaining confidentiality. That arrangement ends when the notebook is in my hands. Which I'll verify how. You'll have to trust me." "I'd rather not." "Seraphine." His voice sharpened by a fraction. "I've honored every arrangement I've ever made. You know that. It was always my best quality." "Your best quality is making people believe you're reasonable until you're not." Roman looked at Cassian. "Is she always like this?" "Pretty much," Cassian said. "The attorney," Seraphine said. Roman made a brief gesture to one of the standing men, who pulled out a phone, made a call of 8 seconds, and nodded. "Done," Roman said. "The notebook." She walked to the table and set it down. Roman opened it. He was methodical, not hurried, not performing patience, actually patient in the way of someone who has been precise for so long it has become structural. He turned pages. He checked entries. He produced a phone and photographed the micro SD card before removing it from its envelope and pocketing it. He read page 31 slowly. 8 minutes. She counted. Then he closed the notebook and looked up. "Where's the copy?" he said. She met his eyes. "What copy?" "The encrypted file." He set his hands flat again. 14 months ago, a federal investigator named Aldous Webb received an encrypted file. I know this because Pell identified the transmission 6 weeks after it was sent, and I've been managing it since. He looked at her steadily. "Where's the second copy of the recording?" Seraphine felt the cold move through her, not panic, the specific cold of realizing the plan has been seen. "There is no second copy," she said. "You sent it to Webb." "I sent a decoy file to cover an internet search I was running. It registered as an outbound transmission, but it wasn't—" "Seraphine." Roman's voice was very quiet. "I have Pell's full analysis of the transmission. I know what it contained. I know Webb has had it for 14 months and hasn't been able to act on it without the originals." He paused. "Which means you just walked in here and handed me the originals while Webb is out there with an encrypted copy that he now can't use because the originals are in my possession." He tilted his head. "Did you think I didn't know about Webb?" The room was very quiet. Cassian's voice came from her left, steady. "How long have you known?" "About Webb? 4 months. About the transmission? 14. Roman picked up the notebook. "You came here to buy him time. That was the arrangement. Walk in, run verification slow, give Webb a window to move formally." He almost smiled. "But I already moved formally. 2 hours ago, before you arrived, I sent Webb's supervising director a package that demonstrates Webb has been conducting an unauthorized investigation using sealed testimony from a deceased federal judge's private files he accessed outside his official capacity, without authorization, using a correspondence record from a private account." He paused. "Webb is not currently in a position to move on anyone. He's currently explaining himself to his director." Seraphine heard Cassian breathe out slowly beside her, heard her own pulse in her ears, steady and too fast. "The families," she said, reaching. "The financial records." "The Fain arrangement was finalized 90 minutes ago," Roman said. He said it without gloating, which was somehow worse than gloating. You were still in the motel. Everything she'd built, every contingency, every thread that had seemed to hold. Roman stood up. He didn't move toward them. He simply stood, which in a room with 4 armed men behind him was sufficient. I want you to understand that this doesn't need to be violent, he said. It never needed to be violent. You have a daughter. She's... He paused. 6, I think. She has Cassian's eyes. She should get to have a life. He looked at Cassian. You have an opportunity here to step back from everything and remain intact. The syndicate restructures under new management. You retain the legitimate holdings. Your name stays clean. My father, Cassian said, was a man who made difficult decisions in difficult times, Roman said, as we all have. Something happened in Cassian's face then. It wasn't the controlled nothing from the parking lot. It was the thing underneath the controlled nothing, finally breaching the surface. Not rage, not grief, but the specific and absolute clarity that forms when a person stops calculating and becomes entirely present in a single decision. No, Cassian said. Roman looked at him. No, Cassian said again. Not the holdings, not the name, not any version of what you're offering. You killed my father in his own house while he trusted you, and you did it slowly, and you were there at the end, and there is no arrangement that puts a ceiling over that. Roman's expression shifted by a degree, just 1 degree, the reasonableness going somewhere colder. Cassian, I heard his voice, Cassian said, on that recording. He was afraid you wouldn't be believed. He was already afraid, and you were still in his house, and he still didn't know. His jaw was tight. I know, and I'm not making an arrangement. Roman looked at the man to his left. A small nod. Seraphine moved before the man finished reading the nod. She went left and low, not toward the armed man, toward the table, toward the single work light positioned over it, which she hit with her palm hard enough to send it off the table edge and crash to the floor, taking the pool of light with it. The central floor went dark. Not completely. The floodlights from outside the perimeter came through the high windows in bands, but dark enough, different enough, the visual landscape of the room rearranging in the half-second it took everyone's eyes to adjust. Cassian was already moving in the dark. She could hear it. The specific sounds of him not running but accelerating, the crash of something structural, a short impact, a voice saying something in the high register that meant pain. She went for the staircase. Not away, toward it, upward. The upper gantry overlooked the entire floor, and the floodlight poles outside were close enough to the east wall that the upper level was brighter than the floor. From up there she could see every position on the ground, and from up there she could access the main electrical panel she'd identified coming in. Old building, old wiring, the panel box mounted at the top of the staircase on the east wall, the kind of installation that hadn't been updated in 20 years. She took the stairs at a pace that was slightly too fast for safety and completely necessary, and the man who'd been posted at the top of the staircase heard her coming and was ready, which was a problem she solved by not stopping, by going into him at full speed and using his own preparation against him. His weight shifted forward to meet her, and her momentum converting that forward lean into a backward fall that took him off the gantry platform and into the safety net rigged below it, which had clearly been installed by someone with occupational safety concerns and was today doing excellent work. She hit the electrical panel with both hands. The main breaker for the work lighting. She pulled it. The 3 remaining light pools on the ground floor went dark simultaneously. The only light left was the peripheral spill from the outside floods through the high windows, which turned the interior into a landscape of sharp shadows and angles where shapes were visible, but features weren't. From below, voices. Roman's voice among them, controlled, giving directions. And the sound of movement, multiple people repositioning. Then a sound she hadn't expected. From the east entrance, which was the entrance she had not come through and had not been visible from the approach. Metal on metal, the specific sound of a heavy door being opened from outside. Not Roman's people. The sound was wrong. Too many, too coordinated. The organized acoustic signature of people entering a space with a plan. A voice she didn't recognize. Federal agents, nobody move. The flood of flashlight beams through the east entrance split the dark into white columns. Seraphine gripped the gantry railing and looked down at the ground floor. 4 federal agents through the east door. 2 more visible at the north window. Roman's men were frozen in the crossbeam of flashlights, the instinctive stillness of people who have just recalculated their options and found them reduced. Roman was standing near the table. He had the notebook in his hand. He was the only person in the room who was not frozen. He looked up. Through the dark and the cross-beamed lights and the distance of the gantry, he found her face. And then he moved. Not toward the agents, not toward the exit she'd have predicted. He moved toward the north wall, toward a door she hadn't accounted for, a door that wasn't on the building permit filing because it had been added after, cut through the original structure with the kind of modification that doesn't appear in county records. "North wall!" she shouted. "Door north wall!" Cassian's voice from the ground floor, somewhere in the dark. "I see it!" She went back down the stairs at a controlled fall, hand on the railing, feet barely landing, the kind of descent that is technically not running and is not something she would recommend, and hit the ground floor in time to see Cassian cross the floor in the direction of the north wall door and see Roman already through it. The agents were managing his men. She didn't stop to account for them. She went through the north wall door behind Cassian. Outside, the north face of the shipyard backed against a concrete loading dock that ended at the river. Below the dock, the water, black in the dark, moving, the river current audible against the dock pilings. Above the dock, at the far end, a metal ladder running up the building's exterior to the roof, and at the bottom of that ladder, Roman Vescari, notebook in hand, beginning to climb. Cassian was 20 feet behind him. Seraphine was 10 feet behind Cassian. Roman climbed fast for a man of his age and his particular brand of composure. Not panicked. He had clearly prepared this exit, knew every rung, had done the calculation that the roof gave him options the ground floor didn't. Cassian hit the ladder and went up. She went up behind him. The roof of the shipyard was flat except for the gantry infrastructure that extended upward through it and the 2 floodlight poles at the perimeter, which from up here were at eye level, their lights flooding outward and leaving the roof surface in relative dark. The river was visible beyond the east edge, wide, black, moving. The city lights of Portland were visible upstream. Below, the sound of federal operations continued. Voices, vehicle radio, the structured noise of an organized action. Roman was at the west edge of the roof. He had the notebook. He had nowhere to go. He turned. He looked at Cassian standing 15 feet from him with the light from the floods cutting across them both. And the notebook in his hand was raised slightly, not as a weapon, but as the thing it actually was, the last piece of leverage available. "This goes over the edge," Roman said, "into the river. And then you have nothing. Webb has nothing. Your father's recording is on a card I have in my pocket, and the backup materials at the attorney's office have already been retrieved. Yes, I moved faster than you did." He was breathing hard, but his voice was controlled. "You can take me, or you can take the evidence. Choose." Cassian looked at him. "You can't have both," Roman said. "I know," Cassian said. He looked at the notebook, at Roman, at the river below the edge of the roof, at everything he'd spent 8 months building toward, reduced to this, a rooftop and a man holding paper over open water. Seraphine moved to his right, not toward Roman, toward the floodlight pole on the west perimeter, where a service box was mounted at head height. Maintenance access, she'd seen them on both poles from the road. Old external wiring in a box that would be unlocked because they always were, because the people responsible for maintaining them had been using the shortcut for years. Roman's eyes tracked her. "What are you doing?" Roman said. She opened the service box. Inside the relay board for the perimeter floodlights. She looked at Roman, at Cassian. At Cassian she said, "Don't move." She pulled the relay. Both perimeter floods cut out simultaneously, and the roof went completely dark. In the dark, the sound of Cassian moving, fast, precise, the sound of someone who has been waiting for a specific opening. A collision. A struggle in the dark that lasted 12 seconds. Not long, not clean, the sounds of it unglamorous and physical and real. Then silence. Then Cassian's voice. I have him. She found the relay again by feel and closed it. The floods came back. Roman was on the roof surface with Cassian's knee in his back and his hands pulled behind him, and the notebook, slightly crumpled, was on the rooftop surface 3 feet away, intact. Roman was breathing hard. His composure was the only thing left undamaged. You should have taken the deal, he said to the roof surface. No, Cassian said. I shouldn't have. From below, the sound of federal agents moving toward the exterior ladder. From the river, the distant sound of a boat. A river patrol, responding to the address Webb had presumably sent before his situation complicated itself, because Webb had clearly filed something with someone before his director had called. Seraphine picked up the notebook, turned it in her hands, every page intact. She looked at Roman's profile against the rooftop. The micro SD card, she said. Roman was silent. Roman. Left jacket pocket, he said. Not defiant, just precise, still, even now. She reached into his left jacket pocket and took it. The federal agents came over the ladder edge in a line and crossed the rooftop, and one of them, the lead, credentials already out, looked at the scene with the expression of someone integrating a significant amount of information rapidly. Aldous Webb sent us, he said. He filed a formal evidence submission 40 minutes ago with the director's office. Full package, full chain of custody, corroborating testimony from a Darian Maddox currently in protective custody. He looked at Seraphine. Mr. Webb wanted me to tell you that he's having a very difficult evening, but that the director has reviewed the evidence and authorized formal action. He paused. He also said you'd know what that means. She did. Roman, from the roof surface, said nothing. For the first time, had nothing to say. Cassian stood up and stepped back. He looked at Roman for a long moment, at the man who had been at his father's table every major holiday for 12 years, who had been trusted with the architecture of everything, who had built a patient and intricate structure of betrayal across 2 decades and had almost made it permanent. He looked at him for a long time. Then he looked away. At Seraphine. At the notebook in her hand and the card in the other, at the city lights along the river and the agents securing the rooftop and the particular quality of the air at this height, cold and moving, smelling of water and rust, and the end of something. Is it over? He said. He said it quietly, just to her. She looked at the notebook, at the card, at everything it had cost to get to this roof with these things intact. Almost, she said. Below them, from somewhere in the building, a sound she hadn't expected. A phone ringing. Not a federal agent's radio, not the structured communication of an operation, but a standard ringtone, coming from the jacket of one of the men being processed below. A ringtone she recognized because she had heard it once, in a car, from a phone that belonged to someone she'd believed was on their side. Pell's phone. It rang 4 times and went to the holding message and then was silent. She looked at Cassian. Pell wasn't taken, she said slowly. He's here. He was here the whole time, inside the building, coordinating for Roman. She scanned the agents on the roof, the figures below through the high windows. He's not in custody. Cassian scanned the same. North Dock, he said. The river. If he had an exit plan, she was already moving back to the roof edge. Below, on the loading dock, a single figure was moving fast toward the water's edge, where a small motorboat was tied to the last dock cleat, running lights off, engine beginning to turn. Pell. 4 years. He had his go-bag over one shoulder, and he was untying the cleat line with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this exact sequence, and the engine caught on the second turn, and the boat began to pull away from the dock into the Black River current. Seraphine looked at the floodlight pole beside her, at the service box, at the relay board she'd already opened once tonight. Inside it, behind the relay switches, a secondary circuit. The dock lights, also on this panel, also wired to this box. Because the building was old and the wiring was old and everything ran back to the same 2 panels because whoever built it had been practical rather than careful. She hit the dock lights. The loading dock below flooded with light simultaneously, and the boat was 15 feet from the dock, and Pell turned back toward the source of the light with his hand up against the sudden brightness. And in that moment he was completely visible. Face, position, the bag over his shoulder, the direction of travel. On the dock below, 2 federal agents had come through the north door. They saw him. They communicated to the river patrol. The boat made it 40 yards into the current before the river patrol intercepted it. Seraphine stood at the roof edge and watched it happen. The patrol lights coming on, the radio commands, the small, inevitable geometry of it, and felt something leave her body that had been living there for a very long time. Not satisfaction, not relief, something quieter than either. The specific sensation of a weight that has been load-bearing for so long you forgot it was there until the moment it shifted. Cassian came to stand beside her. They watched the river, the patrol lights. The boat brought to a stop in the current 40 yards out. 4 years, she said. Yes. The safe house, the corkboard, all of it. Yes. She looked at the notebook in her hand. It's still intact, she said. Webb has everything he needs. And Roman is in custody. And Darian is safe. A pause. And Pell is in the river, Cassian said, with something in his voice that was not satisfaction either. Below them, on the rooftop stairs, the sound of the federal operation continuing, Roman being processed, the building being cleared, the structured and unhurried noise of an action that had reached its operational conclusion. She looked at Cassian. He was looking at the river. What happens now? She said. He turned from the river, looked at her, fully, directly, without the managed composure, without the careful arrangement of his expression. Just looked at her the way you look at someone when you have stopped performing any version of yourself and are simply present in the fact of them. Webb needs our statements, he said, and Darian needs to get somewhere real. And there's a woman named Agnes in Astoria who has a 6-year-old and a stuffed rabbit who's missing both button eyes, and we need to go get her. Seraphine's chest did something she didn't immediately manage. That's not an answer to what I asked, she said. No, he said. It's not. He looked at the city lights along the river. I don't have an answer yet. I just know the next thing, and the next thing after that. And at some point, the next things start adding up to something. She looked at him. At the notebook in her hand and the river below, and the city glowing upstream and somewhere north of here, in a house in Astoria belonging to a 71-year-old woman who had spent 23 years keeping another man's house with loyalty and without fanfare, a 6-year-old girl with silver blue eyes was sleeping with a one-eyed rabbit pressed to her chest, unaware that the world had just rearranged itself into something she would grow up inside of and never fully know the cost of. Okay, Seraphine said. It was the same word she'd said in the flower shop, in the ruin of the front window, with glass on the floor and a choice in front of her. It meant the same thing it had meant then. From below, a federal agent called up. We need both of you for statements? She looked at Cassian one more moment. He looked back. Then they turned and went back toward the ladder and the noise below and the long, unglamorous, necessary work of everything that came after, while the river moved in the dark behind them and carried what it carried toward wherever rivers go. The federal building in Portland had the particular quality of institutional spaces at 2 in the morning, fluorescent and airless, the coffee burnt past the point of honesty, the carpet a shade of gray that had been chosen specifically to hide the evidence of years. Seraphine sat in a chair across from a woman named Agent Doris Crane, who had the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything sometime around her 40th birthday, and had been making careful notes for 90 minutes without once changing her expression. Cassian was in a different room. Standard procedure, they'd said. Keep the witnesses separate until the primary statements are recorded. She'd agreed without argument because she understood the logic, and also because she needed the 90 minutes to think without his presence reorganizing the way she thought. The notebook was in an evidence bag on the table between them. The micro SD card was in a separate bag beside it. Agent Crane had played the recording twice, the first time with the clinical attention of someone processing evidence, the second time with a quality of stillness that meant she was hearing something she hadn't expected to hear. A dead man's voice, measured and frightened, naming a man he'd trusted for 12 years. Mr. Draven's father recorded this voluntarily, Crane said. Yes. Without any law enforcement contact. He'd had law enforcement contact 20 years before, It didn't go the way he expected. Seraphine looked at the bag. He didn't trust the process. He trusted paper. Crane made a note. The physician, Dr. Elliot Farr. Page 31. The payment record and the date. His practice is in the Pearl District. We'll be speaking with him tonight. Crane looked up. Miss Vale, for the record, the encrypted transmission you sent to Aldous Webb 14 months ago. Walk me through that. She walked through it, all of it. The transmission, the attorney, the contingency structure she'd built over 7 years. Crane listened without interrupting, made notes in a handwriting so compressed it looked like a different alphabet. At the end, Crane set down her pen. This was notable because the pen had not left her hand in 90 minutes. You built all of that alone, Crane said. Not a compliment, not criticism, just the flat observation of someone who has spent a career assessing what people are capable of. My brother helped, before Roman took him. And in the 7 years before you surfaced tonight, no contact with any law enforcement agency, no attempt to report. I had a 6-year-old. Seraphine looked at her steadily. And the last time someone in my family trusted a process, it put him in a private facility for 6 years. She paused. I needed what I built to be enough before I used it, because if I moved too early and it wasn't enough, I didn't get a second chance, and neither did she. Crane held her gaze for a moment, then she picked up her pen. Webb's full submission has been reviewed by the director, she said. The sealed testimony from Judge Foss's files has been unsealed by a federal court order issued 2 hours ago. Roman Vescari is being charged on 6 counts tonight, with additional charges pending the physician interview. She paused. Gregor Fane's organization is being contacted by federal agents in 3 cities simultaneously as of 40 minutes ago. The Fane-Vescari arrangement will not be formalized. Seraphine absorbed this. It landed differently than she'd expected. Not as triumph, not as the cathartic resolution she'd imagined in the back office of the flower shop across many sleepless nights. It landed quietly, like something that had been held under pressure for a long time, releasing with a hiss rather than an explosion. And Aldous Webb, she said. Mr. Webb submitted his evidence through proper channels and is cooperating with the internal review. Crane allowed something that was not quite a smile. His director is a pragmatic woman. The results tend to speak for themselves. She was released at 3:40 in the morning. Cassian was in the corridor outside, sitting in one of the institutional chairs with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose, and his eyes on the floor. He looked up when she came through the door. Neither of them said anything immediately. They had each spent 90 minutes in separate rooms accounting for the same 7 years from different angles, and the accounting had cost something, and they were both carrying the cost in the specific way of people who are too tired to manage it and too wired to set it down. Darian, she said, protective custody suite 2 floors up. They let me see him for 10 minutes. Cassian stood. He asked for coffee and a cheeseburger and a phone charger in that order. They got him all 3. Something in her chest loosened by a degree. He's okay. He's Darian. A pause. He told me to tell you that the history book he was reading when we arrived was about the 30 Years' War and that he has opinions. She laughed. It came out wrong, too sudden, too close to something else, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment and breathed. Cassian watched her without moving or speaking, which was the right thing to do, and she was aware of it. Agnes, she said when she could. I called her an hour ago. She's awake. Leora is asleep. He paused. Agnes was feeding her alphabet crackers and watching a nature documentary about penguins when I called. She said Leora named all 4 of the television penguins. Of course she did. She named the main one Cassian. She looked at him. He looked at the floor with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Something unguarded and slightly devastated in the way that good things are sometimes devastating when they arrive after a long time of nothing good. We should go get her, Seraphine said. Yes, he said. We should. They drove north in a car Webb's office had arranged, not the SUV, which was still parked a block from the shipyard and would presumably be processed as part of the scene. A federal pool car, clean and anonymous, smelling of air freshener and institutional use. Cassian drove because Seraphine's hands were doing something she wasn't in control of yet. Not shaking, but present in a way hands sometimes are after a long night, aware of themselves. She watched the road. The darkness moving past, the river visible in gaps between buildings, and then gone. The city thinning as they moved north toward the coast. The sky beginning to do its 2-hour rehearsal for dawn without actually committing to it yet. "What happens to the syndicate?" she said. "It's already happening." He glanced at the road. "Webb's submission includes the financial structure Roman built under both our names, the 3 shell companies, the diversion accounts." He paused. "The legitimate holdings are separable from the criminal infrastructure if the documentation is clear. Webb's team will spend 6 months being sure it's clear. And after 6 months, there are 47 employees across 8 legitimate businesses who have nothing to do with anything Roman operated. A marina in Astoria, 3 freight operations on the West Coast, a property management company in Seattle." He was quiet for a moment. "My father built most of them before Roman was anything. They're real. They employ real people." He kept his eyes on the road. "I'm not going to let Roman's exposure take them down with it." "That's going to require you to be visible," she said. "Yes." "Cooperating with a federal investigation, restructuring on the record, demonstrating clean management." She looked at him. "You'll be answering questions for a very long time." "I know. And they'll look at everything you did, not just Roman." "I know that too." He didn't look away from the road. "There are things I did that I'm going to have to account for. Not Roman's things. Mine." A pause. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She looked at his profile in the dark of the car, at the scar above his left eyebrow, the cut from the flower shop now closed with 2 butterfly strips from the federal building's first aid kit. At the 7 years on his face, the same way she could feel them on her own. "I hated you for 6 years, she said. She'd said it in the safe house too, but that had been a statement of record. This was something else. "I know. And then I stopped, which I said was worse." "Yes." "What I didn't say was why it was worse." She looked at the road. "Because when you stop hating someone, you have to figure out what was under the hate the whole time, and what was under the hate was—" She stopped, let the road go by for a moment. "It was just the fact of you. That you existed and that I had built a life trying to not factor that in. And it was always factored in. Every decision, every morning in that shop." She paused. "Every time Leora laughed with her head tilted to the left, which is what you do." Cassian's hands shifted slightly on the wheel. "I tilt my head when I laugh," he said. "Yes. I didn't know that." "I know you didn't." She looked at her hands. "She does it more than you. She laughs more easily." He was quiet for a long time. The darkness outside thinned imperceptibly. Not dawn yet, but the knowledge of dawn somewhere in the air. "I want to know her," he said, quietly, carefully. "The way you say something you've been holding in exactly the right position for a long time to keep it intact. I understand that everything about what that means is your decision. I understand I have no standing to—" He stopped. "I just want you to know that I want to know her, whatever form that takes, whatever it costs." She looked at him. "She already named the television penguin after you," she said. He exhaled, short, uncontrolled. Then he pressed his lips together and focused on the road with the intensity of a man who is not going to do whatever his face is trying to do in the next 30 seconds. She looked out the window and let him have the 30 seconds. Agnes Beaumont lived in a yellow house on a residential street in Astoria, 4 blocks from the water. She was 71 and had the bearing of a woman who had kept other people's houses for 23 years, not because she lacked alternatives, but because she was constitutionally suited to it and had made her peace with that 20 years before anyone else was comfortable with it. She opened the front door before they reached the porch, which meant she'd been watching for the headlights, and she looked at Cassian for a moment with the expression of someone who has known a person from childhood and is continuously updating their file. "You look terrible," she said to him. "I've had a night," he said. She looked at Seraphine. A different look, assessing, not unkind. "She's asleep in the back bedroom," she said. She wouldn't go until I agreed that Percy could sleep with his head on the pillow like a person. She stepped back from the door. Come in. There's coffee. The coffee was not burnt. It was the best coffee Seraphine had tasted in what felt like several years, which was partly the coffee and partly the kitchen it was served in. A kitchen with a cat asleep on the windowsill and a begonia on the counter, and the specific domesticity of a space that had been loved into its current state over a long time. She sat at Agnes's kitchen table and drank the coffee, and Cassian sat across from her, and Agnes sat at the end, and nobody said anything that needed saying for a few minutes, and this was one of the better silences Seraphine had experienced in recent memory. I knew your father, Agnes said to Cassian, not gently, just directly. For 23 years, he was a difficult man in ways that required patience, and I had patience, and we understood each other. She turned her mug in her hands. He was also a man who recorded something because he was afraid no one would believe him. She looked at Cassian steadily. That's not a man who deserved what happened to him. Cassian looked at his coffee. No, he said. He wasn't. Agnes nodded once. I'm not going to tell you to grieve properly, or however people tell each other to grieve. I'm going to tell you to eat something, because you look like you haven't eaten since yesterday, and there's bread and eggs in this kitchen, and I'm not going back to bed yet. She stood up and went to the stove with the decisive movement of a woman who has solved many problems by feeding people, and Seraphine looked at the doorway to the back of the house and then looked at Cassian. I'm going to check on her, she said. He nodded. The back bedroom was small and smelled of the cedar drawer liner Agnes used throughout the house. There was a lamp on the nightstand turned down to its lowest setting, which cast the room in a warm and impractical light that Seraphine recognized as the specific concession adults make to children who don't want total dark in an unfamiliar place. Leora was in the center of the bed with Percy arranged on the pillow beside her, as negotiated. Percy's repaired button eyes facing the ceiling with the solemn expression of someone taking a responsibility seriously. Seraphine stood in the doorway. She stood there for a long time, not doing anything, just looking at the fact of her daughter asleep in a safe room in a safe house, with a lamp on, the whole shape of her, the dark hair across the pillow, the hand curled near her face, the sound of her breathing, ordinary and total and present. She thought about the tile in the floor of the back office, the exit tunnel, the twice-yearly drills she'd run in her head, never out loud, never in front of Leora, the contingency structures she'd maintained with the same regularity she'd maintained the shop's inventory. 7 years of preparing for an emergency that had arrived and been survived. She thought about what it would mean to stop preparing for emergencies. She didn't have an answer yet. She suspected it would take time, the kind of time that can't be scheduled, that arrives on its own terms and in small increments, a morning here, an afternoon there, until enough of them have accumulated that you stop measuring. She went into the room, sat on the edge of the bed, put her hand on Leora's back and felt the steady, uninterrupted rhythm of a child who has fallen asleep somewhere. She felt safe and has continued feeling safe throughout the night. Leora's eyes opened, not startled, just opened, the way children wake when they were only lightly sleeping, aware of more than they let on. "Mama," she said. "Yes, baby." "Is it over?" Seraphine looked at her. "What do you mean?" Leora blinked slowly, redistributing the sleep in her system. "You had the same face," she said, "before and after, on the drives, and when you told me to go water the roses again." She looked up at the ceiling with the considering expression she got when she was working something out. "Grandma Agnes's cat is named Wellington." "That's a good name." "He doesn't answer to it. She says he knows it but ignores her." A pause. "Mama," the man with the cut on his face. Seraphine was very still. "He had my eyes," Leora said. Not a question. She said it the way 6-year-olds say things they've been sitting with, as a simple fact being verified out loud for the first time. "I looked in the mirror last night. After he came to the shop, I stood in the bathroom and looked." She tilted her head. "Did I get them from him?" Seraphine looked at her daughter, at the silver blue eyes in the lamplight, at the 6-year-old who had packed Percy and the drawing and had not screamed in a room where screaming would have been entirely appropriate, and had named a television penguin after a stranger with her face. "Yes," she said. Leora considered this. Will I meet him again? Yes. Soon. Very soon. Leora looked at Percy on the pillow, straightened his ear with one finger. Okay, she said, and closed her eyes again. The conversation complete from her perspective, the thing settled. Seraphine sat on the edge of the bed until the breathing deepened again. Then she went back to the kitchen, where Agnes had produced scrambled eggs and toast without fanfare, and Cassian was eating with the focus of someone who has not eaten since yesterday and is reconciling himself to this fact. She sat down. Agnes put a plate in front of her. She ate. At some point, Agnes went to bed with the tact of a woman who has been reading rooms for 7 decades and knows when her presence has completed its necessary function. They sat in Agnes's kitchen in the last hour before dawn and finished the coffee and didn't speak for a long time. And the silence was the kind that has history in it, but is no longer weighed down by it. A different kind of silence than the ones they'd been carrying. She asked me if her eyes came from you, Seraphine said. Cassian set down his mug. What did you tell her? Yes. She looked at the table. She said okay and went back to sleep. He was quiet for a moment. She said okay. She processes things and then she sets them down. She's always been like that. Seraphine looked at him. She named the penguin after you. Agnes told me. He turned his mug in his hands. She told me what she said. She said... He stopped, collected himself. She said he had a face like he was waiting for something, and this is that thing. She's 6 years old. She's perceptive. She's terrifying, he said, and meant it as the highest possible form of acknowledgement. Outside, the sky was beginning to consider the question of morning. The kitchen window faced east, and the black was graying at its edges, with the particular reluctance of November dawn on the Oregon coast. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a bird made a single, unconvincing attempt at morning and then stopped. I have a meeting with Webb's team in Portland on Thursday, Cassian said, the restructuring documentation. First of what will probably be a significant number of meetings. I know. It's going to be visible, like you said. I know. He looked at the window. Dr. Farr. He said the name flatly, the physician who had filed the false report. Webb's people went to his home at 4 this morning. He'd been expecting something for years, apparently. He cooperated immediately. A pause. He'd been cooperating for Roman since before my father got sick. He said he'd thought about it every day since. His jaw worked. He said he was relieved. People make arrangements, she said, and then they have to live inside the arrangements they've made. He lived inside it for 7 years. Yes. She looked at him. How does that sit with you? He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the light outside changed another degree, definitively now, the gray becoming a lighter gray. I don't know yet, he said. I wanted... He stopped, started again. I spent 8 months building toward what I thought I wanted. And now that everything is in front of Webb's team and Roman is in federal custody and the physician is cooperating, he shook his head. I thought I would want him destroyed. I thought that would be the shape of it. But all I feel right now is tired. That's what the end of something feels like, she said, not what it looks like in the version you rehearse. He looked at her. You've done this before. I've ended things before. Small things. The decision to disappear, the decision to build the shop, the decision to stay in Astoria when I should have moved again. She turned her coffee mug. Every ending feels like being tired. The satisfaction comes later, if it comes. It's never where you expect it. He was looking at her in the way he'd looked at her on the roof, without managing his expression, without the architecture of control. Just present. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. Past Thursday. Nobody does, she said. That's not particularly reassuring. I know. She looked at him. But you said it yourself. You know the next thing, and the next thing after that. He was quiet. The marina in Astoria, she said. The one that was your father's. Yes. Is it actually a marina? He blinked. Yes. 32 slips, a maintenance facility, a small retail operation. He looked slightly nonplussed at the change of direction. Why? Because Wild Ivy is going to need a new front window, she said, and the storage room is going to need cleaning, and I have a lease through next April. She looked at her coffee. And it turns out the only flower shop in Astoria is 4 blocks from a marina, which is probably fine. He looked at her for a long time. Seraphine, he said. I'm not saying anything, she said. I'm just noting the geography. Right. And the fact that Leora's school is 3 blocks from the marina. I see. And that Agnes lives 4 blocks from the shop. That is a lot of proximate geography, he said. It's a small town, she said. The corners of his mouth moved. Not a full smile, said. He wasn't there yet, and neither was she, and they both knew it and were honest about it in the way you're honest when you've just spent a night accounting for 7 years and have arrived at a kitchen table at dawn with scrambled eggs and burnt history and the slow gray light of a coastal morning coming through a window. But the corners of his mouth moved. I need to tell Darian in person, she said. About Roman. About all of it. He deserves to hear it from me, not from a federal debrief. Webb's office will release him to a support arrangement tomorrow. He'll need somewhere to stay. He can stay with me. She said it without thinking, and then thought about it and meant it. He's been somewhere for 6 years. He should be somewhere he chose. A pause. He's going to need work. Something real. I have 47 legitimate employees who are going to need stable management while I'm attending federal meetings. He looked at her. Does Darian know anything about freight operations? He knows how to show up and work and not complain about the hours. She paused. He's also been reading history books for 6 years. He might have opinions about logistics. That's either useful or a problem. With Darian, it's usually both. The bird outside made another attempt at morning, and this time a second bird answered it, and the kitchen lightened by another degree, the window becoming a thing that showed the world rather than just reflecting the room. And Seraphine looked out at the gray and pale gold beginning to happen at the edges of the eastern sky over the rooftops of the neighborhood. She thought about the cedar cloth, the bracelet she'd left under the tile. She thought about going back to the shop. Not today, not this week, but eventually. Unlocking the door and stepping over the new threshold of whatever the front window became after repair. Walking to the back office. Lifting the tile. She thought she might put the bracelet on. Not because it resolved anything, not because 7 years was undone by a piece of jewelry, but because she was 31 years old and she was tired of keeping things under floors. She would think about it. She would decide later. I should check on Leora, she said. She didn't move immediately. She's asleep, Cassian said. She's been asleep for hours in a room with a cat named Wellington who ignores his own name and a lamp that's too warm. She's fine. I know she's fine. She looked at the window. She stopped. You're not used to not checking, he said. No. That takes time, he said. Apparently. She looked at him. Apparently. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. Outside, the birds were establishing something, a conversation or an argument, the distinction being largely semantic at 5:40 in the morning in a residential neighborhood in Astoria. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday with thin winter sun and the particular quality of coastal cold that came off the water and went through everything, Wild Ivy flowers reopened with a new front window and a repaired door and a small hand-lettered sign that Leora had made at the kitchen table using a green marker in considerable seriousness, which read, open in letters of varying size, and a drawing of what was either a flower or a sun, the distinction also being largely semantic. Darian was on his second week at the freight office in Portland, where he had already reorganized the filing system and sent Cassian a 3-page memo about container tracking inefficiency that Cassian had read twice and forwarded to 2 senior people with the note, address this. He called Seraphine on Tuesday evenings. The calls ran long. They were getting longer. Cassian's first meeting with Webb's team had been Thursday, as scheduled. The second had been the following Monday. The third had been Wednesday of that week. He had told Webb's team everything, in the flat and detailed manner of a man who had spent 8 months investigating himself by proxy and had arrived at the interviews pre-organized. The process was going to take a long time. He had stopped trying to estimate how long. On Tuesday morning, he arrived at Wild Ivy at 7:30 with coffee from the place 2 blocks over that Seraphine had mentioned was the only place in Astoria that got the temperature right, which he had located and verified and concluded she was correct about. He arrived with 2 cups and stood outside the new window for a moment before going in, looking at the display Seraphine had built overnight. Dahlias on the left, dried lavender in bundles from the ceiling beam, everything arranged with the precise and unpretentious care of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and did it because it was worth doing. Through the window, he could see Leora on the counter, cross-legged, with a fistful of sunflower stems, and her tongue between her teeth in concentration. The same image he had walked into weeks ago, except that this time he knew it was an image, knew what it cost, and what it had taken to preserve it, and he stood outside for one more moment just holding that knowledge before he pushed open the door. The bell rang. Small and ordinary, and at this hour on a Tuesday, in a flower shop in Astoria, the best sound in the available world. Leora looked up from the sunflowers. "You're early," she said. "Traffic was light." She considered him with the silver blue eyes that were his eyes in her face in the thin winter light through the new front window. "Mama says you're coming every Tuesday now." "That's the plan." "She also said you don't actually know anything about flowers." "That's accurate." "I can teach you," she said, with the simple confidence of someone who has never once doubted their own competence in this specific area. "Sunflowers are easiest. You start with those." She held one out to him. He looked at it for a moment. At her. At the shop around them with its dahlias and lavender and the particular quality of morning that comes through a west-facing window on the coast, that specific gray-gold light that is not romantic exactly, but is honest, the kind of light that shows things as they are. He took the sunflower. "Okay," he said. Seraphine came through the back curtain with a pair of clipping shears and saw them. Cassian standing at the counter holding a sunflower with the slight bewilderment of someone receiving an instruction he intends to follow, and Leora already moving on to explaining the second sunflower in her collection with the brisk efficiency of a 6-year-old teacher who has identified a student with potential and intends to develop it. She looked at them for a moment. Just looked. Then she set the shears on the counter and went to turn the sign from closed to open, and the morning came in through the new window, and it smelled like flowers instead of gunpowder, and there was nothing else it needed to be.